Welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. We're diving deep into the intricate layers of the 7-stage generational wealth model to offer invaluable insights on legacy building, wealth accumulation and preservation, and financial growth across generations. I'm Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and this is the New Wealth Wave podcast. Hey, future wealth builders. This is Dr. Joaquin Wallace, and welcome to the New Wealth Wave podcast. Today, we are focusing on stages 2 and 3 of the generational wealth model, and to help lead the discussion will be Nate Astle. Nate Astle is a marriage and family therapist and a certified financial therapist, and is the founder of the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. He specializes in couples with financial conflict, financial trauma, and shifting financial behavior patterns. He has been cited in the New York Times, CNBC, the Wall Street Journal, and other major outlets. Nate, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This will be fun.
Looking forward to it. I've been following you from afar from LinkedIn. I mean, your stuff that you put on your post has been outstanding. And our producer, Ray Haycraft, said, hey, listen, when you get a chance, we have to get Nate on the podcast. And I reached out to you and you said, sure. So I'm excited to have you on. So if this is your first time tapping into the New Wealth Wave podcast, make sure you subscribe. And guess what? Our subscriptions are growing thanks to you. So I am pleased with that as well. But continue to share. And I have a request. If you are currently a subscription holder of the New Wealth Wave podcast, reach out and share it with 5 individuals. That's all I ask, 5 individuals to keep our subscriptions growing as well. As you know, the more subscriptions we have, the more households we are reaching as well. The podcast is based on my 7-stage generational wealth model. And let's get into the 7-stage generational wealth model itself. So stage 1 is our internal and external ecosystem. Stage 2 is our financial genetic code, which we focus on financial trauma and financial anxiety. Stage 3 is financial healing, where we attempt to reprogram your financial genetic code based upon stages 2 and 1. Stage 4 is financial edification, where we talk about financial literacy and financial inclusion. Stage 5 is financial well-being. This is your soft landing. This is where we're all trying to get to. We want to get to a position where we're not outliving our income. Financial health is so important. Stage 6 is generational knowledge, because we know generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And at this stage, we're talking about planning and planting the seeds to create your financial footprints to eventually reach stage 7, which is generational wealth. So Nate, you had a chance to review the model. What was your initial thoughts?
I think it's great. It's very comprehensive. And I think that's what we need more when it comes to financial literacy. We have to see the big picture. And I think the model itself is a big picture. And that's exactly what we need. So I think it's great.
Appreciate you saying that. Now, before we get to the heavy lifting, I always ask our podcast guests one question, kind of break the ice. So tell us and the listeners a fun fact about yourself.
Yes, I'll give you 2. One is I'm a huge Lego fan. I am honestly, yes, I'm a professional and all that nonsense, but honestly, I'm an 8-year-old boy at heart. And so if I could, I would just be playing with toys all day. I love Legos. I'm also a huge Lord of the Rings fan. So I'm, like I said, just a little nerdy kid at heart. And when I do have spare time, what I like to do is build Legos. My wife and I do it together. And we listen to an audiobook and we're both building. And it's just a great way to take care of your inner child. So highly recommend revisiting the toys of your childhood, because I bet they would bring you joy today too.
That's interesting because I love cartoons. I love the old cartoons though. I mean, I love the Tom and Jerry's. I love the Looney Tunes cartoons. I mean, I can watch those and laugh while watching those, because it does remind you of your inner child, the Jetsons and the Flintstones. Okay, now I'm dating my age, but those are cartoons that I do love to watch. And, constantly, I usually go on YouTube actually and kind of pull them up as well, because it's pretty funny when I have some dead time. So in the model itself, we talked about the comprehensiveness, as you mentioned earlier. So this is a 3-part question. So because the model is based on 3 areas, it talks about your past, it talks about the present, and it talks about the future. So before you became who you are today, this individual that has a loud voice in this space of financial trauma and therapy, where were you located on the model?
Step 1, honestly, before I knew what financial therapy and all that was, I was just like any other human, where I was on autopilot with so many things. I went to school to get my master's degree in couples and family therapy. I knew I wanted to be a therapist. I knew I wanted to help couples specifically, was always the interest point. A lot of reasons for that was my parents' conflict and how that affected me as a kid. My parents fought a lot And I had a lot of, unfortunately, negative responses to that, some traumas and beliefs about myself that I had internalized. And it wasn't until I was in grad school and happened to be at the right place in the right time where I learned about financial therapy at Kansas State University that I realized so much of my struggles and so much of my automatic responses and things were about my parents' conflict about money. That was a huge driver of my own financial behaviors, but it's also a huge driver in how I viewed what money is and what it's supposed to do. Quite honestly, it led to a lot of my own financial avoidance patterns. I hated talking about money. I hated to think about money. And my wife and I were fairly newly married, and she was awesome on top of things, trying to be intentional about budgets and having money conversations. And I really resented those conversations. Luckily, I had a great therapist that helped me see how impactful money had been. And that's kind of the moment where I was shifted from autopilot, auto responses to being intentional with my financial healing.
Outstanding, because that really kind of speaks to the model itself in terms of stages 1, 2, and 3. You mentioned earlier, it was like you was reprogramming your financial genetico, basically, when you was going through the model itself. So with that being said, Nate, what was your aha moment that you realized that, what, I need to make a change?
It was definitely in therapy. I remember a session. I was talking to my therapist about my parents, and she asked me, what did they fight about? What was like the big things? And I would talk about my dad's work, and he was working too much. And there was one moment where my dad had bought a four-wheeler, which is a significant purchase, but he didn't tell my mom about it. And he just comes home one day with a four-wheeler, and I was 11 or so, and they had a big blow-up fight about it. And I remember feeling so guilty because on one hand, I was an 11-year-old kid, and there was this four-wheeler, cool new, like really cool new toy. But I also remember feeling like, does me enjoying this toy make my parents fight more? And I had internalized their conflict as a problem with me. Now, as an adult, you realize, like, well, that's not fair, but it's a belief that started in childhood that when my therapist helped me untangle that, I was like, oh, now I'm starting to see more about why I struggle with money in the present. I had all these money memories that often go kind of unconscious under the radar. You're not constantly thinking about these per se, but they have a huge impact on what you do. So that was a big aha for me in therapy, and I'm very grateful for it too.
It's interesting because when you talk about that, you recollect that we all have financial trauma, some anxiety, and it really comes back to our stage 1, right? Internal, external ecosystem, how that kind of shapes us into our financial genetic code. These perpetual cycles, they're, like I said earlier, it walls in when it's unbeknownst to us, generationally willed down to us. And we're going to get to the third question. Just want to talk about how, in terms of marriage, it's so important because, my theory, and I'm sure you can support this as well, is that you have two different individuals coming from two different ecosystems, and they're coming into a relationship. And based on their relationship in terms with money, their stage 1 and their stage 2, now you're together and you're on two different paths. And oftentimes we don't know the actual number, but we do know that a large factor of divorces is a byproduct of money because the conversation's having a different idea of what it's all about. Some people are financial prisoners. Some people are spendthrifts. Some people spend, and you have these two individuals together in a relationship. And who does it affect? It affects the kids. And unbeknownst to us, we take that and we harbor that on and we continue that. We carry that baggage as well. So many of the clients you meet today, where are they located on the model?
Most of the clients I meet are stages 1, 2, and 3. They may recognize that something's wrong or that there's a problem in their financial life or financial journey, lots of stress, lots of shame. And they come to me because they don't have very many pathways to get professional help. Most financial planners and financial professionals generally really aren't super focused on those stages. And unfortunately, most therapists, traditional psychotherapy, as a group, therapists are pretty money avoidant. They don't like talking about money. A lot of times, what happens though is you don't really get the support. You don't know where to go to get the help you need for processing your financial trauma, for better understanding your story and how the past is affecting the present. So most of my clients are coming in looking for help processing those stage one, two, and three.
That's interesting because we had Sandra Davis on earlier, and she spoke a lot about the financial shaming as well. That's part of it. We talk about financial literacy and financial shaming and things of that nature. Interesting concept. So now you talked about, what most financial planners may be lacking, so to speak, and what some therapists be lacking itself. So what you've done, you've created your own organization. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. We have three missions or three arms. We have a clinic where we treat and work with clients on helping them move through those stages that you're talking about. We have a training arm where we train professionals, both mental health professionals and financial professionals, on different aspects of your model, different aspects of how to help people with financial trauma, how to work with couples, how to work with families. It's really helping both professions move towards a more holistic view of finance. And then we also have a research arm where we collect data and work with academics to prove that it works, show that people can and do move through these stages, and also prove that financial therapy is a effective model of therapy and that people can heal both psychologically and emotionally around their money story, but also make different financial choices. So that's kind of the big three arms. The clinic itself, which is where our clients come through, they work with financial therapists on the psychological, emotional, relational aspects of money. Financial counselors traditionally are doing day to day money management, helping clients build budgets, helping clients develop debt repayment plans, kind of that numbers, starting to work with the numbers. And then we have financial planners doing some targeted long term financial planning. We're not managing assets or investing things for people, but we are giving them hopefully the structure they need so that they can go and flourish in the outside world, or maybe the cocoon until they're ready to be the butterfly.
I like that. So I'm going to ask you a question. In your opinion, in your organization, the way it's set up, based on your research, do you believe that everybody is prepared for actual financial advising and planning before not getting stages one, two, and three? You talk about the behavior and the therapy.
No, and we purposely set it up so that when they start, we typically, and I say typically because there are always exceptions to what clients need, but most of the time we start them with therapy and financial counseling. So we do these simultaneously. So it's like 1 week with a therapist, 1 week with a financial counselor, 1 week with a therapist, 1 week with a financial counselor. How our treatment model works is we are building tolerance for having open discussions about money, because we do need to look at actual numbers. And sometimes you just need someone to hold your hand while you do it. So that's what the financial counselors is there for, is to provide the safety, the space, and the accountability to say, okay, we are going to start looking at what you have going in versus what you have going out. Numbers are consequential. However, numbers happen in context of the person's past, the person's traumas, the person's cultural pressures. There's a whole lot of different pieces. So that's why the financial therapy is a key part of that first stage of treatment as well. We're working on building emotional tolerance for difficult topics. We're working on building communication, especially if we're working with couples, which we often do. And those skills, necessary prerequisites to having the appropriate financial planning, or setting the stage for your actual financial choices. Typically, we don't bring in an actual financial planner, so the long term, big picture perspective person, until 2 to 3 months into treatment. There's exceptions if someone has an urgent financial question that we need the financial planner for. But for the most part, our model is set up so that they get the building blocks first. So that way they can fly on their own. We get them the plan, we get them what they need eventually, but we have to start at the first stages first.
Future Wealth Builders, you're listening to Nate Astle. He's joining us. He's leading the discussion in regards to our 7-stage generational wealth model, stages 1, 2, and 3. Make sure you subscribe. This financial therapy, this trauma is so, so important in moving forward and trying to get to stage 5, which is your financial well-being. You talk about working with couples. Nate, what's some of the pushback that you get from couples coming in? Because we know some couples come in and say, we have no problems. We have no problems. But I'm sure that after a couple of sessions with you, they wind up they have a ton of problems. So talk about some of the pushback that you receive.
Truthfully, most couples that come to me because they know they have problems. The most common pushback that I see, and it's less about pushback against me or the work we're doing, it's more pushback against their partner. A lot of people have the misconception that couples therapy means I go to the therapist and the therapist tells my partner all the ways that they're wrong. Couples therapy is, at its core, good couples therapy requires both of you to acknowledge that you play a role. It always takes two to tango. So the pushback that I typically get is actually showing both partners that you contribute to the financial conflict. And it's not about assigning blame. Quite honestly, that's a non productive conversation. It's about acknowledging I can't control my partner, but I can influence how my partner experiences the relationship. If I focus on myself, the stuff that I know I struggle with, we create safe places to talk about communication breakdowns or different things that might be affecting the relationship. You have a much better chance at actually solving a problem. For example, when a couple comes in and they have a conflict about a future financial choice, we got this inheritance, or we have to decide whether to support our kid during college, or potentially about a past experience. I caught my partner with a gambling addiction. There's a whole lot of different things that come in with. One of my first things I'm doing is saying, okay, you both got your stuff that you need to work through. The goal here is to show how we can still be on a team. I kind of think of it like a monster, and we have one partner attacking the monster from one side and the other partner attacking the monster from the other side. This pincer attack is actually a really important perspective of we have a shared enemy, and that shared enemy is our conflict cycle. Our shared enemy is our communication breakdowns, and we both work together as a team to reduce those symptoms.
When you have your couples come in, is there some homework assignments that you give them? They go home, they come back with the homework assignment, and kind of walk us through the process.
There's several homework assignments I give them. One of the first ones I almost always do is have them write out their money timeline. Essentially, it's just a journaling activity of talking about different developmental stages and major money moments in those stages that they have emotions about. These impactful, meaningful experiences around money that shape how we think and feel and behave around money. So one of the first things I do is I say, all right, in order to know why what's happening in the present is happening, we have to understand where both of you are coming from as far as past. So most couples find that to be very insightful because they might have had one or two conversations about money, but the important part here is what emotions do you feel when you think about that memory? Another homework assignment that I'll give them is I give them what we call the feelings wheel. It's just an image of a wheel and it's got a lot of feelings words. And you can Google this, by the way, and it's awesome. And I'll have them print it out or I'll have them put it on their phones or something. And anytime they either make a money choice or have a discussion with each other, I ask them to use the feelings wheel and describe their emotional experience. Oftentimes, we find patterns in our emotions where, like, our fights happen most when I'm feeling this way, or I am more impulsive with my financial choices when I'm feeling this feeling. If we can learn what that feeling is, we're then able to tie it back to when have you felt this way before, connect it to past experiences, past financial flashpoints. And we start to see the pattern of, oh, what happens is I start feeling out of control, or I start feeling afraid, or start feeling shame. And that leads me to unconsciously, most of the time, act out in this certain way. And then we start working on, okay, let's explore those emotions more. Let's talk about how we want to respond to those emotions so that we're not finding financial solutions to what are emotional problems. That's a huge part of what we do at the first stages of therapy. Takes some time, takes some doing, but it's a very effective way to work through financial experience and wellness.
So when a person gets ready to, I guess, graduate and move to the next phase, when do you know that this person is at a point now where we can move them along, kind of pass them on to the next phase of your program?
The financial counseling and financial therapy are happening at the same time. So, as they are working on these communication skills and emotion skills, they're also working on building budgets, following through on the budget, going over different debt reduction plans, and starting to make small goals. There are some key, I'll say, indicators that someone is ready to move on to the next stage. One is, can I regulate my emotions when they get big? It's not fair to expect any couple or any individual not to have feelings around money. That's going to happen. That's okay. But when the feelings come, can I use my skills? Can I be aware of the emotions? Can I regulate those emotions when they come up so that I'm not acting in destructive ways, either to my relationships or to my money? The other thing is, it's not that couples don't have conflict. All couples will always have conflict. It is a universal truth. The problem isn't the conflict itself. It's not what you fight about, it's how you fight. So the problem isn't, oh, my partner and I disagree. That's going to happen. It's when we have a disagreement, can we use our skills, our tools, our communication methods, and things like that so that the conflict doesn't lead to withdrawal, it doesn't lead to escalation, it doesn't lead to a continued feeling of not being on the same page. When you can do those things regularly, more often than not, I would say, yeah, you probably are ready to start talking more long-term plan.
So let's transition from now the actual client, and now let's look at those individuals who would like to become certified, because you also offer that piece within your organization as well.
There's a huge gap in training out there for professionals. I think we're seeing a shift in at least the financial industry to recognize traditional financial planning is not reaching the whole picture. We're seeing a shift to more financial coaching, more holistic views in general, which I think is great. However, the actual training that's available is pretty minimal. There's a handful of books, there's some people that are stepping into the space, but truthfully, you've got like maybe 5 to 10 choices. The other thing is, most of the choices that you have are either an academic program, which is great, but most people aren't actually going to do that. Where they go back to school for another year or two. I don't think that's necessarily realistic. And then the other programs are usually these big, bulky certifications, which again, great and important and serve a role. But what we try to focus on is more cafeteria style training, where, if I want to, I can buy all the trainings from the Institute and learn all the things. If I really am just starting to need more couple specific training, then I can just go and buy the working on couples training. The other thing that I am really proud of with our training is all of our trainings include a full hour role play. So you can see what a financial therapy session looks like from beginning to end. How to ask this question. We cover concepts, and in the training we cover, and you get worksheets and all that. But I think the capstone experience is seeing an actual session, because unfortunately, unless you're doing it, it's kind of hard to learn for a lot of people. So that's kind of the opportunities we're focused on now. One other thing that's really exciting is this year, this October, we're putting on the first financial therapy externship. It's a 2-day full live training where you just get hours and hours of role play experience and get opportunities to actually feel what it's like to be holistic in this way. So that's kind of the niche that we're filling.
Future Wealth Builders, we were speaking to Nate Astle again. This is great information because not only are you focusing on the end user, which is the client, but you're also focusing on the financial professionals as well. Because as you mentioned earlier, there can be a gap within that, right? Because we always talked about financial literacy and things of that nature. We mentioned earlier, I find being in the business itself, being that person as an advisor, planner, that there is a disconnect. Oftentimes when I'm meeting with my clients, I would show them the model and we'll go through the model itself. And some of the pushback is like, this is not me. And that's the first sign of financial trauma, right? Financial anxiety, because you're basically saying that's not you. And then once you go through the process itself, they say it does make sense. The issue that you find in the business, though, is that, let's say, per se, an individual is able to get through your program and then move into, stage 4, which is financial edification, stage 5, financial well-being. Oftentimes, those individuals will be in stage 5, the well-being part of it all, and find themselves, something may have happened conversation, a life experience, and they go right back to stage one. Now they start bringing back the baggage, the financial trauma, anxiety, and then now they have to go right back through the reprogramming itself. And so I love the holistic approach because it gives the individual the opportunity to always have that information. They can always take self inventory of what's going on currently for them right now. Could you give us an example of a particular class that you would recommend? I know you have a lot of courses, but a particular class that you would recommend for a financial planner?
The one that I think is most likely to come across your door is financial trauma. So we have a course on treating financial trauma. The course goes over some things. It does go through professional tools that a therapist might use for working with traumatic events around money, but also recognizing what financial trauma looks like. Because I think a traditional financial planner or someone who's gone through traditional financial planning education, they're lucky if they've heard the word financial trauma. They certainly might be able to guess what it means, but they probably don't realize how prevalent it is. People who have significant traumatic experiences around money, it's a huge portion of the population. It's not if, it's when they work with someone with significant financial trauma. So that course goes over recognizing symptoms, and it can be two biggest ones, symptoms of financial trauma that I see in my work. One is when our emotional reaction to something doesn't match the data. I see that I have X amount of dollars available to me, or I see that I'm planning appropriately for the future, but my emotions haven't caught up. I see that there's slight concern in this area, but it's like I feel it at an 8 or a 9, but the data is actually only a 2 or a 3. There's probably some financial trauma there. It's when our ratio of reaction is bigger than or less than what the situation warrants. The other big sign that I see of financial trauma is pendulum swinging. So this is where if I had a traumatic experience where I saw my parents act this way, I'll either do the exact same thing or I'll do the exact opposite. And we swing in extremes. And so I'm either hoarding money and I'm saving, and I get major anxiety spending any money on myself, or spending and I can't see myself saving because that would mean I'm not taking care of my current needs. That's one of those things where like, oh, no, there's a middle ground here. It's okay to spend money on yourself. It's actually it's an important part of healing financial trauma is learning to joyfully experience what it's like to spend money you planned for on something that's fun and for you. And that doesn't mean that it comes at the cost of your future self. So I think treating financial trauma, I do like the course, obviously, but as a concept is crucial for financial planners to recognize and know where to go to send people. It's not a fair expectation that planners are going to become therapists and know how to treat all these things, but you do need to recognize it. I also think of it kind of like CPR. You don't have to be a nurse or an EMT to know CPR, but knowing CPR makes you so much more valuable in an emergency situation. Mental health or financial trauma CPR, you don't need to know how do I treat and like help someone heal per se, but I do need to recognize what it looks like and know the basics of how to help someone stay alive until someone more experienced can help them. That's kind of the perspective I take. You do need to have tertiary knowledge of other fields, even if that isn't your day-to-day experience.
Again, that's why I feel it's so important when you're getting into this space of if you're a financial planner or therapist or counselor or advisor. I firmly believe that you have to meet the person where they're at. Oftentimes, we put our expectations onto that individual. I would say it's unrealistic expectations. When you put unrealistic expectations on anyone, the first thing they do if they're not able to reach those expectations, they quit. They feel like they failed, which is so important. And so when you're looking at, when you're meeting with a client, it's important to be empathetic, right? Be empathetic as well. Put yourself in their situation, and not everyone is the same. I think financial literacy is so important. I mean, I think it's a small piece to the puzzle, though. It's
Mhm.
important, but it's not the end all, because financial literacy basically says, well, I'm going to give you these skills, but what about the other things that come into this? What made this person who they are? And you touch upon this in your organization, which is great. And you're starting to see this shift as well. I applaud you for that. Again, when I was looking at your post and reading, I was like, this guy gets it. he really gets it. And so, the individuals that we have to come on the New Wealth Way podcast, we focus on that. We're not selling anything. We're pretty much providing education with experts such as yourself to give a different perspective, but also humanize it as well, because we're human too. We have the same issues that those individuals are that we're helping. And as we know in business, typically in business, you're going to form a business based on a need, but the need is probably something that you went through, right? So I went through this personally. So I say, hey, well, that's not out there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an organization that I struggled with. And lo and behold, it turns into what you've done so far. Now, let's go back to the actual client itself. When you're talking about budgeting, because budgeting is so important in the
Yeah.
process. My theory is, well, from my experience, most people can't budget because they don't have money to budget. However, if you give them realistic expectations, and one of the things that I'm sure you talk about and discuss is, well, we always talk about Maslow's 5 hierarchy of needs. But for the most part, I always try to educate my clients on a couple of things: the difference between disposable and discretionary needs and wants, right? It's important to know that. But one thing that you said that resonated with me and that resonates with a lot of people: you have to live today and plan for tomorrow. You have to reward yourself with something today, because if you don't, you wind up not being happy. Talk about that.
There is no sustainable budget. I believe this very firmly in a lot of clinical and personal experience with it. There's no sustainable budget that doesn't have room for fun. We get into restriction, and that's often what people associate budgeting with, is restricting or like dieting, right? The reason diets fail is they aren't sustainable. We do them for a while. We might even see some progress with them, but typically diets aren't how we stay eating for 30, 50 years. It's the same thing with budget. When we think of budgeting only as restricting our spending, then psychologically we just get to a place where we can't handle it no more, and we metaphorically binge, right? Or we say, screw the diet, I'm going to go eat whatever I want because I'm tired of being on the diet. I don't blame you for that. I would do the same thing. A sustainable budget is one that says, yes, I have needs, I have things that are higher priority for me, but it is very important that a high priority for me is to spend money on things that bring me joy. It doesn't mean that I can necessarily afford to go to a concert every weekend, but if it's important to me, that if I'm a concert goer and music is a huge part of my life, then it is important to me that I make a savings goal for a concert in the summer. Saving is a need. Fun is a need. And some financial planners will use things like, we don't call it a budget, we call it a spending plan. That's great. I'm planning to spend my money. And honestly, in the end, money is just a thing that we deal with in this life, but it's just a means to an end. Like, it provides safety, or it provides stability, it provides joy, it provides the opportunity to have a shared experience on a vacation. And if we get too caught up on being smart with money that we forget the why, I genuinely think you're going to end up with a lot of regret. At the end of your life, on your deathbed, you're probably not going to be thinking about, thank goodness I stayed within my budget in June of 2024. You're going to be thinking about your friends and your family and the people that are most meaningful to you. And money is just a means to that end.
I firmly believe, and you mentioned this, and this is so important. I talk to my clients about this. I do a lot of workshops as well. And I talk about diet, and you mentioned it. And again, diets fail because internally, when you hear the word diet, you're already saying what I can't have. I can't do that. I can't eat this. I can't do that. And I always say, you know what, versus dieting, let's do this. Let's shift the narrative and say we're going to change our lifestyle. Oh, that's totally different. And so, because if I'm changing my lifestyle, I'm gradually getting to where I want to get, but I am comfortable. I'm comfortable with doing the things that I like to do. Right. And it's like if someone says, hey, I want to go out and run a marathon. Well, that doesn't mean you go out and run 26.2 miles today. No, you gradually take your time, you changing your lifestyle to actually get there. And one thing I always say, if you're consistent consistently, your outcome will consistently be consistent. And the hardest thing that we as humans can do is to be consistent consistently. We're inconsistent consistently. Therefore, we have inconsistent results. And so when you're talking about the budget as well, when you're speaking to someone, I always bring those points up. It's first and foremost, let's place you on a realistic expectation that you're comfortable with doing. Let's say what you can have. Let's say we're changing our lifestyle. That's all we're doing. We're changing our lifestyle because at the end of the day, you're going to be more comfortable with the change of lifestyle because a change of lifestyle doesn't say what you can't do. It's basically saying, I'm changing my lifestyle. I may not go, let's say, I love Starbucks. I love my tea. I go get my tea, but I can afford that. This is something that I afford to do. Now, I can buy tea at home, but I like the experience. I like to go and have the tea made. I like to put this in and sit there sometimes and drink it and get in my car and drive off. I love that experience, but I've earned that right. I shouldn't feel bad about that. But I put that into my spending plan, so to speak. I know exactly, what I need to do in regards to that. And when you're meeting as a counselor, right? Because this is what you're talking about. You're talking about budgeting. They have the 50-30-20 rule. That may not be realistic where you're living. Those are unrealistic expectations. And as you mentioned earlier, if they're not able to get it, they say, you know what? The heck with it. I'm done. I'm going to go back to doing the things that I do. They don't wind up getting to the point where they need to get to. And I'm sure within couples therapy, that's a big, big issue that you have to work through because some people haven't been on a spending plan. They don't know what it is. They've never been in a position. So you have one individual saying, we need to be on a spending plan. You have the other individual saying, well, I just want to spend, I'm going to live today, because tomorrow's not promised, but you have to
Yeah.
find that happy medium. So in regards to that, what can your organization do to kind of massage that to get them onto the same page?
The word that comes to my mind is safety. Starting to follow a spending plan needs to be a safe experience. A lot of times, this is where a lot of financial shame comes in because we see following a budget as a matter of discipline. Of course, we have to be disciplined and consistent, right? But when inevitably we struggle to follow through on a budget, if we've never had one before, if we've struggled before, we start getting down on ourselves. We start feeling like there must be something wrong with me, or there must be some character flaw inside of Nate that means that he's too lazy. And we have moralized budgeting. And unfortunately, what that leads a lot of people to feel is unsafe. It feels emotionally unsafe to engage with this topic, especially in couples where maybe one partner is better or more naturally inclined to follow a budget and the other person isn't. It's probably been moralized a lot in that relationship. Where instead, what we need to do is say, okay, we all acknowledge that it's important to know what's coming in and what's going out and where. We all acknowledge that it is important to be able to plan for the future, including putting money aside in the form of budgeting for planned expenses. But what we're not going to do is shame ourselves when that's difficult. What we're not going to do is threaten the relationship safety when we struggle. We're not going to attack others people's character. All we're doing is practicing something as a team. We create that experience in session, and hopefully it's something that they continue to create out of session. Then it no longer becomes a me versus you thing. It's me and you versus the problem or versus a task. In most couples, the thing I like to remind them of is you've done hard things before. You have problem solved a million things in your relationship. It's just that right now, because of stage 1 and 2, your traumas and all that other stuff, you're hitting some barriers. If we can make this a safe thing, just another problem to work through, just the same way maybe you are really good at being on the same page when parenting, or you're really good around in-laws or whatever other strengths the couple has. You have done hard things before. You've problem solved a lot of things before. We just need this to be a safe enough topic. We create that so that this can be another thing just to problem solve. It doesn't need to be this huge moral quandary, if that makes sense.
You speak about how ADHD is paramount in decision making. And that's something fascinating when you kind of talk about how ADHD is in relationship in regards to stage 1 and 2, and actually three of the 7 stage model itself.
Yeah, so ADHD is a mental health diagnosis, but it has huge implications for how we experience money. Typically presents during childhood, however, it's not always caught during childhood. ADHD means that you struggle with certain tasks. We call them executive functioning tasks. So this is things like prioritization. This is things like organization. People with ADHD struggle to process dopamine the same way. And so what happens is they often become thrill seekers and they struggle with boring tasks, which money often becomes a boring task. You know, if I was to tell someone with ADHD, I need you to sort your transactions from your bank account, like, poof, that is a rough thing to ask them. And I say that because I have ADHD and I know how rough that is. With ADHD, though, there often is a history of shame. This comes from ableism. Our world is set up for people of normal abilities, even the word normal abilities. But people with ADHD are just taught or told that they're lazy. You know, if only you applied yourself more. Again, very moralized. So what happens is you have difficulty with the tasks that are normally required with money management. That gets compounded by shame of not doing those tasks well over the years or over time. And so now I have this significant pattern of avoidance. And it causes me a lot of emotional distress to even think about making, doing the thing. And so when we're working with people with ADHD, it's one, we have to create systems that work for the ADHD brain. So we have to create systems to increase dopamine in the financial planning experience. This is things like, okay, when you do your money day, I want you to also plan it with something that you're looking forward to. When you're figuring out tasks, it's really easy to forget tasks. And if you saw my desk right now, I have a million little sticky notes. We have ways to write things down because we struggle to focus on something for a while. So we have to build systems that work for their mind. We also have to deconstruct some of the ableist messages and things that they've been taught so that they learn to see themselves not as fundamentally broken or lazy or bad people with money, but is help them see, hey, money actually can be a safe experience. We just have to make it work for you, which is 100% okay and doable, and you can be successful with this.
Outstanding. We're talking to Nate Astle. He is the founder of the Financial Therapy Clinic Institute, Future Wealth Builders. This has been an outstanding podcast, learning a lot of information. You're dropping a ton of nuggets. And, I'm going to ask you, this is so good of a topic. We would love to have you come back and continue on because I have a ton of more questions for you as well. A couple of final questions for you. So, when you look at the model, the 7 stage generational wealth model, is it something that you believe that both a planner or a therapist like yourself and an actual client can actually look at and you can kind of teach and kind of walk them through the process itself?
Absolutely. As I said at the beginning, it is very comprehensive. And I feel like what you can do is, you can take the stages and go into each one of like, how do I work within stage one? There are subheadings under each stage of how do I work with? What are the things I need to look out for? Absolutely. I think no matter what profession, anywhere between mental health or financial planning, you can use this model to guide thoughts and guide assessing where clients are, right? I think that's also another really big benefit of the tool is like, okay, what kind of support do they need? Well, let's look at what stage they're in, and then that can guide what are the professionals or type of professional support you may need.
Final question for you. So, what do you want the listeners to take away from this particular podcast?
Take a couple of breaths and be kind to yourself. Self compassion is one of the biggest tools you have in your financial tool belt. The reason why is one of my favorite sayings is shame is the enemy of change. If I do not see myself as inherently valuable, as inherently good, as inherently worthy of change, my motivation and my likelihood of actually following through on a plan to make a change significantly diminished. Shame keeps us stuck. And so the antithesis of shame is self compassion in my mind. And shame thrives in isolation and it dies when it is told in safe places. So if we can make our relationships safe to talk about money and we can make our internal dialogue, our own internal voice, a compassionate one, that is 90% of the battle. It really is. You can work with therapists, you can work with planners and counselors, you can work through all these stages so much better if we can break through the shame and break through the harshness that we so often treat ourselves. And quite honestly, we would never say to other people what we say to us. So, if we can be intentional about that, you have a much better shot of actually making wealth and money a part of you.
So please provide your contact information. If someone listening to this podcast say, hey, you know what? I want to reach out to Nate. How do they do that?
You can just search for Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. Financialtherapyclinicalinstitute.com is our website. I am on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. I don't bite. I have a pretty open door policy. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. If I'm not the best fit, if I can help you find what you're looking for, that really is my goal. So yeah, reach out with whatever you'd like.
Future Wealth Builders, this has been an outstanding episode. Nate Astle led the conversation today, the founder of the Financial Therapy Clinical Institute. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share. Remember, share it to 5 individuals. We can increase our numbers as well. On behalf of the New Wealth Wave podcast, my producer, Ray Haycraft, would like to thank Nate Astle for coming on today, dropping all of these gems. And as we say, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. I'll see you on the next New Wealth Wave podcast. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on the New Wealth Wave podcast, hosted by Dr. Joaquin Wallace. Our show is edited and produced by Ray Haycraft. To dive deeper into the world of financial wisdom and learn how to create your financial footprints, head to our website at www.drjwallace.com. For more updates and exclusive content, connect with us on social media by searching Dr. Joaquin Wallace. And if you have questions and comments, feel free to email us at thenewwealthwavepodcast@gmail.com. Remember, generational wealth begins with generational knowledge. And as always, thanks for listening. The content presented in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes and should not be taken as investment advice. The views and opinions expressed by our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the New Wealth Wave podcast and its host or producers. Listeners are urged to exercise discretion and judgment before making any financial or investment decisions. Always consult with a financial professional or advisor before taking any action based on the content of this podcast. If you're enjoying the New Wealth Wave podcast, we appreciate if you leave us a review. We're always open to topic suggestions and guest recommendations. Feel free to reach out to us directly with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the New Wealth Wave podcast.